and 2nd and 3rd Isaiah. And then Collins talks about, he doesn't even go through all of the minor prophets. Yeah. And I just want to focus then on Haggai, Zechariah, and Joel. I looked at Malachi and Jonah and others, but enough's enough already. The Bible's over there. Okay, thank you. So we're going to look at exilic prophets first. Of course, by exilic, I mean prophets who were prophesying during the exile. So we will again I'll try and help you with getting a handle on these. I mean, really getting a handle on these by looking at the provenance, that is, who wrote them, to whom, when. Pick up some of the themes, what's going on in the book, and then so that you could characterize it, and then also tease out a few things that the book is known for. And obviously when you get to Isaiah, 2nd Isaiah and 3rd Isaiah, you could teach a course just on those and how they relate to the New Testament, basically, because it's so much involved there with the New Testament. But anyways, we'll start with Ezekiel. And Ezekiel was a crazy cat. I know all of his friends used to call him that. He was of a priestly family, most likely the Zadokites. That would be those who have descended from Zadok, the priest under David and Solomon, previous to the exile, right? And they were also the priests of the Second Temple. Everyone knows what I mean when I say the Second Temple? Okay, the rebuilt temple. So he was one of the elite, the first batch that was shipped out to Babylon in the company of Jehoiakim in 597. Jehoiakim was the king at the time. So he's prophesying in Babylon during the captivity, at probably the early part of the captivity, and he's prophesying to Judah and Jerusalem, back to Jerusalem and Judah, with that city under the reign of Zedekiah, which you might remember was Jehoiakim's uncle, who took over the reins there after the first deportation. And he had the sad fate of, after he rebelled, watching his, I won't even say it, it's too nasty. He had a bad fate. But that's Zedekiah. So, what is he doing here? What is Ezekiel doing? So, chapters 1 through 11, basically judgment against or judgment upon Judah and Jerusalem. If you want to look at Ezekiel for a moment, open to the first chapter. Did I need to pick up the Good News Bible? I'll try this one. New King James.
I'm sorry, Ezekiel what?
First chapter.
Oh, okay.
In this first chapter, he's talking about the vision that he has of God, and it's really kind of a combination of two things. two very important strands of it's after Lamentations and before
I have these tabs, but
Daniel. It's after Isaiah and Jeremiah, after those big guys. Find it? Yes. So, there's usually this call. Isaiah has it. We talked about that, how he was in the temple and he had this vision of the cherubim and the coal burning his lips so that he could be pure. Something along those lines going on with Ezekiel, except with Ezekiel it's a combination kind of the storm god of the God of Mount Sinai in the Exodus, where God would speak out of the cloud, giving his law, and was so holy and pure and so forth that the Israelites couldn't come to the mountain. So you have that plus this notion of God being enthroned above the cherubim in the temple. So you have this sort of dual aspect of Exodus and temple, which is pretty powerful. And again, Collins emphasizes the fact that Ezekiel emphasizes the transcendent nature of God. For example, in 126, he'll say, "And above the firmament over their heads was the likeness of a throne in appearance. The likeness of the throne was a likeness with the appearance of a man high above it." So it's not a man on a throne, but something like, or the likeness of, to say again, the holiness of God, the ineffability, the transcendent nature of God. Then you have these weird creatures popping up in verses 4 through 14. So I want to read a little bit about that, just very briefly. 4.
I looked and I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning and surrounded by brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal, and in the fire was what looked like 4 living creatures. In appearance their form was that of a man, but each of them had 4 faces and 4 wings. Their legs were straight, their feet were like those of a calf and gleamed like burnished bronze. Under their wing, on their 4 sides, they had the hands of a man. All 4 of them had faces and wings, and their wings touched one another. Each one went straight ahead. They did not turn as they moved. Their faces looked like this. Each of the 4 had the face of a man, and on the right side, each had the face of a lion, and on the left, the face of an ox. Each also had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces.
Good. Right, so here again is the cherubim, the guardians of the throne. Do those creatures at all sound familiar? The the face of a man, the face of an eagle, the face of a lion, the face of an ox? Ring a bell?
Another creature that had these elements on their face.
I'll just tell you, those are often symbolized of the 4 Gospelers. So sometimes if you see a picture that has like those 4 faces, those 4, that's a representation of the Gospelers. And John is the man, and John is the eagle, and Mark is the man, and Luke, I can't remember was what.
Okay. Is there any, I know in some ancient cultures, and perhaps not even so ancient, prophets, the witch doctors, whatever you want to call them, used various hallucinogens and other things to have visions, and this really sounds like some kind of trip.
It's quite a trip.
So do we know if back in this period of time, if...
I don't think so, but it sure is hallucinogenic. And I'm sure it taps into that same deep, strange
I understand
vibe.
suicide among other things leads toward what seems like a religious epiphany of sorts. That's one of the
That's a
traits.
fascinating question. I would love to hear it if you ever do any research about that, to find out if there was any of that kind of use of anything with these guys.
I've never come across that with biblical prophets, but I know that in other cultures that's
Absolutely.
often how
This-
visions were
That's right.
attained.
Kind of opens the door for these things.
And why would they be different?
Yeah.
What grows in the desert?
Oh. Well, anyways, skipping then again to chapter 4. This is something that Collins talks about. He mentions the symbolic actions that Ezekiel goes through. The action of lying on his side, so that Ezekiel must lie on his left side and bear the iniquity of Judah for 390 days, then lie on his right side for another 40 days to bear their iniquity. This notion of bearing the iniquity is again a tip-off for us that this was done by a priestly author, because to bear the iniquity is the term that in Leviticus used for the scapegoat, what the scapegoat does. I mean, it's a ritual kind of language. So, yeah. Then the real interesting and happy, I wouldn't recommend this, rationing his food and preparing it over human dung. Point is to show, obviously, the impurity, the defilement that was going on. He, a priest, especially doing this, but saying this of Israel or Judah as well. Collins talks about then chapter 8 being this transported vision to Jerusalem, and starting to hone in on what this is all about now. He goes into the temple and sees the glory of God, sure enough, but also an abomination. And that abomination is presumably some foreign statue that's been put in the temple as a worship vehicle. Ezekiel has a vision of this abomination, and we're kind of getting the idea about what's going on, why Ezekiel is prophesying against Judah and Jerusalem. It's because they have been worshiping other gods. So, in the grand scheme of things, it's the Judahites' fault. And he'll later say specifically that it was the priests, guardians of the temple's fault for allowing these practices to go on. No wonder it was destroyed. Such defilement. Remember, he's a priest. This is the holiness thing here. So indeed, the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem, but really it was God doing it. He was just ticked off, just did it. The only way to remedy this situation, this terrible situation, was just really literally to burn it to the ground. And there's the notion of the burning coals over the whole city. And so these coals would destroy and purify the town. Remember Isaiah and the coal, the burning coal. There are some colorful allegories, as Collins says, in the section between chapters 12 through 24. Oracles of judgment against the people of Judah with colorful allegories, as Collins says. Probably don't have time to get into these too much, but these should sound familiar. He talks about the vine again, Except this time it's a useless vine, and it's something to be thrown into the fire. And he talks about the promiscuous woman, right? Israel being a promiscuous woman. Sounds familiar, right? Hosea was all about that. So those are set pieces almost for prophets. What was not a set piece, what was interesting about Ezekiel, and something worth remembering, as Collins points it out, Ezekiel was maybe the first one to go a step beyond the books of Moses and say that, no, this isn't your parents' fault, it's your fault that this happened. You have to take individual responsibility. As he says, the prophet sets out to refute the saying, the parents have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth have been set on edge. Right? Do you get that? That is to say that what the parents did will be visited in the later generations. And that's the book of Moses, that, to the third and fourth generation. No, Ezekiel says, we reap what we sow. It's us. And if you look in Ezekiel 18:5, someone want to read a few verses there? Maybe 5 and 6.
If a man is virtuous, if he does what is right and just, if he does not eat on the mountains, nor raise his eyes to the idols of the house of Israel, if he does not defile his neighbor's wife, nor have relations with a woman in her menstrual period, if he oppresses no one, gives back the pledge received for a debt, commits no robbery, if he gives food to the hungry and the clothes to the naked, if he does not lend in interest nor exact usury, if he holds off from evil doing, judges fairly between a man and his opponent, if he lives by my statutes and is careful to observe my ordinances, that man is virtuous. He shall surely live, says the Lord God.
Okay, thanks. So this again points to a priest having done this in the sense that there, in this holiness code, there is side by side holiness directives as well as ethical directives. You're not supposed to go up to those former hill shrines and sacrifice and have your festive meals there. Remember, Josiah got rid of all of those, centralized the worship of Israel and Judah into the temple. And so paired with that is, not defiling your neighbor's wife and not to rob someone by violence and so forth. And clothing the naked, etc. So there are some directives here and definitions of what's sinful and what is righteous. And as good prophets do. 25, chapters 25 through 32. Those are oracles against other nations. So it's not only Judah and Jerusalem God is railing against, the prophet's railing against, but also other nations. And sometimes for the destruction of the temple. Let's see, in chapter 32. Trying to find in here, I did find at one point some real vengeful prophecies against the foreign nations, and maybe I can find that at a later point, but they are there in Ezekiel as well. Chapters 38 through 48, finally we get some consolation and restoration. For example, in 34:11, he talks about God seeking out the lost sheep. And yet this will not be a restoration back to the status quo, but a new beginning, having been sprinkled clean with water. Chapter 36:25. They will be given a new heart and a new spirit. And there will be a new Edenic-like existence for those in Jerusalem and Judah, like Eden. The old creation had failed. It's time for a new one. Chapter 37 should be very familiar to you. Someone want to read the first few verses of 37? Bobby?
Sure. The hand of the Lord came upon me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me down in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me all around them. There were very many lying in the valley, and they were very dry. He said to me, "Mortal, can these bones live?" I answered, "O Lord God, you know." Then he said to me, "Prophesy to these bones, and say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord God to these bones, I will cause breath to enter you, and you shall live. I will lay sinews on you, and will cause flesh to come upon you, and cover you with skin, and put breath in you."
Okay, great. Thank you. You should be a lector if you're not already.
No, I'm not. I have
Well,
postnasal drip, and so sometimes I drip.
Well, that was beautifully read, and that is a beautiful passage that hopefully is beautifully read on a very special occasion in the church year. Does anyone know when for extra points?
We just had it.
Yeah.
When did we say the Valley of the Dry Bones? Oh,
It was recent.
the Easter Vigil.
Really?
Yes.
Well, I guess I'll believe you. Yeah, it just seems like we had it.
Yeah.
You might have. It might be in other places, but that is one of the big readings.
Because I think Julie read it. No, it's just a couple.
Valley of, was it really?
Julie
Well,
doesn't read that often, so I remember. She's a very good reader. She's very emotional. I was figuring she's going to burst out crying.
Uh-oh.
Because it really gets her.
That can be good and bad.
Yeah. Yeah, she's a good reader.
So he's talking about the restoration of the people of Israel, the restoration of the Davidic dynasty as well. That's one of these big themes, remember. Will David return? Will David's throne, as promised, always exist? Will there always be a Davidic king on the throne of Israel? Those are the big questions. Typically, they try and answer. 38 and 39, we're talking about Gog and Magog, prophesying the destruction of Babylon. That didn't happen. But interestingly enough, that imagery of Gog and Magog and those titles were taken up in the last book of the New Testament in Revelation. The final destruction, final battle between good and evil. All right, so big themes for Ezekiel. It's a long book, right? But what I would like you to remember is the fact that this is of the priestly tradition with priestly concerns. So we saw already that there was no distinction between the moral and the ritual laws, like the Holiness Code in Leviticus. Certainly there's a huge concern and theme about holiness and purity, and another priestly concern. And the fact that the major cause of the catastrophe was this impurity of the people and of the temple, and specifically the priests failed to protect the temple. We also know that it's probably a Zadokite priest because he talks about the fact that in the future only the Zadokite priests should be allowed to enter the sanctuary, the inner courts, and the Levites and the ordinary Israelites were restricted to the outer courts. If you remember the Levites, remember when I just mentioned about the fact that the hill shrines had to come down with Josiah? Well, there were priests at these, Levites at these sites, and so what do you do with them? Well, Josiah invited them to participate in the temple worship. But Ezekiel says, that screwed things up. You can't do that. We're going to have a separation here. Again, this real sense of purity. The most pure being these Zadokite priests. So there's these priestly themes and concerns. Keep that in mind. These symbolic actions, keep those in mind. These bizarre actions of turning on his side. Those would be the two main things I would think would be important to remember. And also, what is it known for? What is Ezekiel known for? Well, he talks of himself as the Son of Man, for one thing. Also, this abomination in the midst of the temple that finds its way in imagery and Revelation. This new heaven and earth where the hearts of flesh will be made of the hearts that were stone. Important thing. And then the valley of dry bones. Very important. So, it kind of has an interesting picture of God, a God who's transcendent, who's very much interested in keeping the purity of his people. And that's reflected in many different ways. The laws, the codes, the temple worship, all this sort of thing has to do with this transcendent God who's very concerned about purity, a God who punishes, a God who punished the people because of their impurity. Any other questions or points you'd like to make about Ezekiel? Okay. Wow. It's just a ton on Ezekiel. And we haven't even gotten to 2nd and 3rd Isaiah, but here we are at 2nd and 3rd Isaiah. I think it's probably for two reasons that Isaiah is the perfect prophet for me. One is that George Friedrich Handel put a lot of his passages from 2nd and 3rd Isaiah into his work Messiah, which is one of the gems of classical music. Unfortunately, and fortunately, it is about Jesus. It's a religious piece. It's that, and also that the New Testament gospel writers seem to have known him so well. 2nd and 3rd Isaiah and 1st Isaiah as well. So there's so many references in the New Testament about it. So probably for us, if you will, the most important prophet. But in his time, he was prophesying during or after the Babylonian exile. So either while they were still in captivity or shortly thereafter when they returned. Talks about Cyrus of Persia. He's the one who conquered Babylon. And Second Isaiah prophesied, and we'll look at 2nd Isaiah first, which is chapters 40 through 55. So he prophesied in one of the most hopeful periods that the Israelites, the history of Israel and Judah ever knew, because Cyrus conquered Babylon, but he did not destroy Babylon. And he actually restored Babylonian gods to their shrines, and he also restored the people of Israel, of Judah, to the temple. He let them go home. And he thought it was more effective to win over the people's trust than to subdue and oppress them. Fairly enlightened of him. So he authorized the Judeans to return to Jerusalem to rebuild their temple. And of course, 2nd Isaiah saw God's hand in all of this. Of course. So in chapters 40 through 48, it's filled with this great expectation of this homecoming, of this new era. Someone take a look at Isaiah 39. So this is right before 2nd Isaiah. It's the last of 1st Isaiah. Chapter 39. Verses 5 through 8. Lisa or Nikki, can you read that?
Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, "Hear the word of the Lord Almighty. The time will surely come when everything in your palace and all that your fathers have stored up until this day will be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will be left, says the Lord. And some of your descendants, your own flesh and blood, who will be born to you, will be taken away, and they will become eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." "The word of the Lord you have spoken is good," Hezekiah replied, for he thought, "There will be peace and security in my lifetime." Did I read the right thing?
Yes, you did.
Okay,
yes,
good.
you did. At least there will be peace and truth in my days. Basically, this is just the last. I almost think of it like a radio communication from right before the fall of Judah, and then there's silence, darkness, destruction, people being carted away, people's belongings being confiscated, and they are remaining in Babylon for a generation. Nothing is said until chapter 40. Comfort, yes, comfort my people, says your God. Speak comfort to Jerusalem and cry out to her. Thus her warfare is ended, that her iniquity is pardoned, for she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. So it's this great turning point in history, and I love that. So again, if you're familiar with Messiah's, the Handel's Messiah, comfort ye, very familiar. Someone, how about read 3 through 5, 40. 3 through 5, 40, chapter 43 through 5.
A voice cries out in the desert, prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the wasteland a highway for our God. For every valley shall be filled in, every mountain and hill shall be made low. The rugged land shall be made a plain, the rough country a broad valley. Then the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all mankind shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken.
All right. Does that sound familiar?
John the Baptist.
John the Baptist, right. And was Isaiah writing about John the Baptist? Well, maybe not knowingly.
Yeah.
I think there's a multivalence here in these prophets, and I think that's what's so beautiful about Isaiah. It has resonance and has significance for his time. It has resonance and significance for Jesus' time. It has resonance and significance for our time. John the Baptist. What do you think he was talking about? He wasn't talking about John the Baptist. What voice crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Sound familiar at all? Exodus. All right, so this is a great theme that we'll find in other places in 2nd and 3rd Isaiah, this Exodus imagery. Someone want to look up 48:3.
The former things I declared long ago, they went out from my mouth, and I made them known. Then suddenly I did them, and they came to pass.
All right. Collins points to this passage as the idea that God had thought of this plan long ago to destroy Israel for their iniquities. It's not that foreign gods overwhelmed Yahweh, but it was his plan all along. All right? And now it's coming to pass. Now he's about to do this amazing renewing act that will get other people's attention. So, I could say a bunch of other things, but I don't have time. Chapters 49 through 55 are concerned with the Jewish community and their internal problems. So then 3rd Isaiah is 56, chapters 56 through 66. Close to 2nd Isaiah in spirit and tone. There is a theme of light. Arise, shine, for your light has come, in 60. And unlike Ezekiel, he sees Jerusalem as more of an open city, more of a universal vision, a city for all people, right? A city for all people to worship God. The Zion-centered one with foreign nations playing a role, a subservient role, but a role nonetheless. So it's very different from Ezekiel, where God would create a holy city in which the Judeans would be separate because of purity, right? Got to keep separate from the Gentiles. Well, Isaiah has a different idea. Gentiles are to come to Jerusalem. They are to partake in the greatness of God. As a matter of fact, God has done this incredible thing. First there was the destruction, then this amazing restoration. And God did that so that he could draw other nations to himself and to Jerusalem. Okay? Different kind of God, if you will. Different understanding of what the role of Jerusalem is. Excuse me. Again, there's some disputes going on in the community that's reflected in 3rd Isaiah. And I think Collins makes the point that there's some tension between 3rd Isaiah and the Jerusalem priesthood. 66 seems to opine that the temple is unnecessary, at least not very important. And it could be that 3rd Isaiah represented a group of people that had been more oppressed in the society itself, and now the temple would be more open to them as well. There's certainly hope for the future. Talks about the servants, the servant people. Who is the servant? Most likely Israel, or the prophet himself, but most likely Israel. There is remember we talked about I haven't got there yet, but in the minor prophets we're going to see that there's often specific prophecies that talk about destruction, and then they go to general apocalyptic that really you can't specify what exactly he's talking about, but it's this general fight of good and evil kind of thing at the end. Well, there is one of those kind of apocalypse times that he talks about it's not in 2nd or 3rd Isaiah, but is appended to 2nd and 3rd Isaiah because it is of that style, and that's chapters 24 through 27. It's a little apocalypse of Isaiah. And that is familiar to us because the passage in chapter 25 about the feast of all people on this mountain, God will swallow up death forever. Very familiar passage from the burial office. On this mountain, God is in the King James, a banquet of fat things, of marrow and wine on the lees and that sort of thing. And God will swallow up death forever. A famous passage. All right, so we kind of tried to tease out what's going on in 2nd and 3rd Isaiah. Some of the important themes: symbolism of light, new Exodus, touched on those two ideas. And again, this idea, as Collins says, for the Yahwists in Babylon, one of the most galling aspects of their situation was the apparent failure of their God and the superiority of the Babylonian deities. With the fall of Babylon and the restoration of Jerusalem, the situation was reversed. 2nd Isaiah claims that this is what God had in mind all along. So God did not fail by bringing the people into captivity. This was his plan. Truly you are a God who hides himself, O God of Israel, the Savior. This is to say, God hides his plans. By hiding himself for a time, this makes his reemergence all the more spectacular, and it is to catch the attention of the nations. Again, we get a more universal picture in Isaiah, where all nations are called to worship Yahweh. And he denies that other gods have any power and comes close to denying their existence. He might have been the first monotheist in the tradition. Before me no God was formed, nor shall there be any after me. I am the Lord, and besides me there is no Savior. In chapter 43. So I said that Isaiah is so important for his time, so important for New Testament times as well. We'll go over some of those passages, but Collins makes a nice point, I think, when he says that Isaiah offers timeless warnings to all who consider themselves people of Yahweh. Equally offers hope and restoration for all generations. So it isn't just about the New Testament or Old Testament. They are words for today. So let's just kind of go through some of these passages that are so very important in Isaiah. What the kinds of things that Isaiah would be known for, 2nd Isaiah and 3rd Isaiah. Obviously that opening passage, comfort ye, the oracle of consolation and hope. 2nd and 3rd Isaiah, passages from 2nd and 3rd Isaiah are used throughout the whole seasons of Christmas and Epiphany in our lectionary. We talked about the voice of one crying in the wilderness. Very important for Advent. Someone want to look up Isaiah 55, 6 through 9. Fifty-five, 6 through 9.
Seek the Lord while he may be found, and call him while he is near.
Mm-hmm.
Let the scoundrel forsake his way, and let the wicked man his thoughts. Let him turn to the Lord for mercy, to our God who is generous in forgiving. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. As high as the heavens are above the earth, so high are my ways above your ways, and my thoughts above your thoughts.
Okay, so you do get this sense of transcendence also in Isaiah. But that's a very famous passage, and it's something that is echoed in Job. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? When Job was arguing. And of course, the servant songs. And in these 4 servant songs, you can find between chapters 42 and 53, they are servants' songs talking about Israel, or the prophet, but mostly Israel. And the first 2 talk about the servant as being a light to the nations. The plan is the restoration of Israel is for the welfare of the Israelites, of course, but also for the conversion of the whole world. The fourth servant song is probably the most famous. It's the one where surely he has borne our infirmities and carried our diseases. Again, reference to New Testament writers have picked that up in regard to Jesus. He was deformed beyond recognition, but will be restored and exalted to the astonishment of all. And that astonishment will lead to their conversion. That sounds very Jesus-y. And again, Collins makes this point, a good one, that there is such a thing as purposive or positive suffering. One person or one people can atone for the sins of others. The scapegoat idea. Israel was the sacrificial lamb led to slaughter, enacting God's plan and making righteous those who were observing the startling turnaround and power of God. So the suffering of Israel had a positive outcome of enlightening the nations. Doesn't talk so much about a king on the Davidic throne, but that the people, the community of Jerusalem, in effect, is continuing the Davidic covenant. Someone want to read chapters 61, 1 and 2. Chapters 61, verses 1 and 2.
The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn.
Sound familiar? That is Jesus' platform. Mm-hmm. That's what he read from the scroll in the synagogue and said, today, these words are fulfilled in your hearing. So again, there's this rich interplay, this rich connection between 2nd and 3rd Isaiah and Jesus. If I had time, and maybe I will someday, just really pore over 2nd and 3rd Isaiah and just hear it resonate with the story of Jesus and hear it resonate in my own life. That would be very cool. All right, anything else about Isaiah? Well, we can talk a little bit about some of the post-exilic prophets. Okay, this is what happens after the exile. Some of these post-exilic prophets are a part of the book of the 12, the minor prophets, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. In most all of these, the theme that is most prevalent is the day of the Lord. Is it going to be a happy time? No. Time of destruction. All except Nahum and Jonah refer to the day of the Lord, the last days, right? And again, there's this pattern where they start talking about a specific judgment over a specific thing, and then it moves to this universal, cosmic, apocalyptic, eschatological judgment. So there's an increased generality, I would say, in all of these minor prophets, post-exilic especially. And from a Christian perspective, it calls to mind the divine plan that heralds the coming of Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit. Someone look up Malachi, which is the last book of the Old Testament, chapter 4, 5.
Lo, I will send you the prophet Elijah before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes.
Mm-hmm. So, who do people say that I am?
The prophet Elijah.
Yeah, right. There's this continuity there. And Malachi is in the Christian Bible, the Christian Old Testament, the last book, so that it goes right to Matthew after that. In the Hebrew Bible, the writings, like Chronicles and those sorts of things, come after the prophets. So there's quite that sense of expectation. Collins, as you read, looked at Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, Joel, and Jonah. See if we can look at three of those. Let's look at Haggai first of all. And they're very different, I find. The writings are very different. The provenance then is to the people of Jerusalem. This is again post-exilic. They have returned from exile. They've been freed by the king of Persia, Cyrus. They returned, and what did they find? Their city in ruins. Not only their city, but the center, the landmark, the the holy mountain, the temple, destroyed. They find their farmlands not cultivated or cultivated well. And the question is, it seems to me, as anyone would imagine, what should we do? And what should we do first? Should we rebuild our homes? Should we make sure our agriculture's up and running? Should we rebuild our temple? Those are the big questions. And these are the questions, all in the knowledge that because they are coming back from captivity, their resources are very limited. They don't have a lot to play with. So what do? They have to figure out what's going on. So Haggai's writing in 520, second year after Cyrus's successor Darius took over. And he writes the people of Jerusalem to prod them into rebuilding the temple. That should be their main priority. As a matter of fact, the temple was rebuilt in 516, 70 years after the destruction of Jerusalem. And interestingly enough, that matches the time of desolation that Jeremiah had predicted. 70 years. Interesting. And all told, it was about 20 years from the first returning until the temple was rebuilt. It seems that the returnees put their needs of building their own homes first. And when they did set their mind to rebuilding the temple, the second temple was not nearly as beautiful or big as the first temple. So the theme here is that Haggai is arguing this rebuilding of the temple that should be the highest priority. And he has an argument. He says, well, look, how are the crops doing, guys? You getting a good yield? No. They've put the seed in, but the harvest is just not doing good. And so Haggai says, well, that's God's judgment on you. You know, you should be rebuilding the temple. Then you will have the harvest, and a rich one. So that's the argument he uses. It is God's house after all, my goodness. And again, he's more along the Ezekiel side of things, where he sees great importance in the rebuilding of the temple and the temple priests and so forth. And he's at odds with some of the other prophets and other people who are finding, like Isaiah, little value in the cultic practices. So maybe they didn't rebuild it because they didn't think it was that important. Not everyone in Haggai's time saw the importance of temple worship. But at the urging of the prophet, and maybe because they thought, hey, it couldn't hurt and might help our crops, they did begin to work on the temple. Haggai also prophesied that God would shake the other nations and that the treasure of those nations would eventually come to Zion, making her great again. That's not exactly what happened. Well, maybe not yet. All right, so that's Haggai. Zechariah. Yeah, we can finish this. Zechariah is associated with Haggai in time anyways. The first vision is dated 2 months after Haggai's last vision, and it is again to the people of Jerusalem. He has visions. He has strange visions in 1 and 2. Chapters 1 and 2, he has visions of 4 horsemen, picked up in Revelation again. 4 horns. Judah will be renewed. Those who plundered Judah will be plundered by their own slaves. So again, we're going to talk a little bit about vengeance and retribution for those who have caused the desolation in Jerusalem. Also at this time, the high priest Joshua was coming under some kind of scrutiny, or there was some problem with his priesthood. He's being accused of something, and so, as Colin says, Zechariah takes us to a higher court, and that is, there's this dialogue with Satan. Satan is the one who's really accusing Joshua. Apparently he'd done something, and yet in this precarious situation of just returning back from exile, Zechariah feels that the high priest, they should be rallying around the high priest and supporting him rather than criticizing him. Okay. So the oracle promises two things. If Joshua observes the Lord's requirements, he will be confirmed in the high priesthood and give access to the divine council. Access to the divine council, that is the privilege of a prophet. And also God is to bring forth my servant, the branch. The branch, Zechariah is predicting the restoration of the Davidic line. If you continue to support Joshua the high priest. He is talking about doing righteousness and doing justice as prophets do. In 9:15, it's an oracle of vengeance. He's going to drink the blood of his enemies. And known for 13:2-6, which envisions a time when prophets will be ashamed of their calling and refuse to acknowledge it. Indeed, as Collins points out, prophecy lost its authority in the Persian period. We don't know the names of the prophets after this time. And it seems like in the Second Temple period, the religious authority became more vested in the scribes, who were the authoritative interpreters of the Torah, and prophets not so much. Also known for the fact that this is one of 3 books of the Bible that talks about Satan of the Old Testament. In Job would be the other one, and 1 Chronicles 21:1 is the second. Someone want to look up Zechariah 9 and 10.
Rejoice heartily, O daughter Zion. Shout for joy, O daughter Jerusalem. See, your king shall come to you. A just Savior is he, meek and riding on an ass, on a colt, the foal of an ass.
All right. Sounds familiar? Palm Sunday. All right, well, let's just finish up by taking a quick peek at Joel. So we've looked at Haggai, Zechariah, and now Joel. Providence is post-exilic again. Perhaps the latest book in the collection of the Minor Prophets. It's placed where it is next to Amos because of it has thematic similarities, the day of the Lord, and also the opening couplet is found in Amos as well. Opening couplet of chapter 3:16. So the themes of Joel, the day of the Lord again. Again, not a festival day, but like Amos, a day of judgment. Joel adds the striking metaphor of a plague of locusts, an invading army with the Lord at the head. So this would be the Babylonian invasion brought about by divine judgment. Joel is going to call for fasting, sackcloth, and lamentations. And anyone want to look up chapter 2 of Joel, 1 and 2, and 12 through 17? We're in Joel, chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, and then 12 through 17.
Blow the trumpet in Zion. Sound the alarm on my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord is coming, it is near. A day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness. 11 and 12?
12 through 17.
12 and 17. Yet even now, says the Lord, return to me with all your heart, with fasting, with weeping, and with mourning. Rend your hearts and not your clothing. Return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, and relents from punishing. Who knows whether he will not turn and relent and leave a blessing behind him, a grain offering and a drink offering for the Lord your God? Blow the trumpet in Zion, sanctify and fast. Call a solemn assembly, gather the people. Sanctify the congregation, assemble the aged. Gather the children, even infants at the breast. Let the bridegroom leave his room and the bride her canopy. Between the vestibule and the altar let the priests, the ministers of the Lord, weep. Let them say, spare your people, O Lord, and do not make your heritage mockery, a byword among the nations. Why should it be said among the peoples, where is their God?
So that is used at a certain time in our liturgical year. Anyone want to guess what day that would be on?
Would it be Good Friday?
Very close.
Ash Wednesday?
Yeah, Ash Wednesday. And Bobby, while you're there, 2:18 and following.
Then the Lord became jealous for his land and had pity on his people. In response to his people, the Lord said, I am sending you grain, wine, and oil, and you will be satisfied. And I will no more make you a mockery among the nations.
Okay, that's good. So it's not all doom and gloom, right? Restoration will happen. And 28, while you're there.
28?
Yeah.
Then afterward I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see visions.
All right, so that again is used in connection with Pentecost, because there's this feeling, this notion from this post-exilic period on into the New Testament that prophecy had died out in Israel. And so here was the promise and hope for the renewed spirit of God in God's people, specifically prophesying. And the whole imagery of Pentecost coming of the Holy Spirit has to do with the Spirit coming and being able to proclaim in various languages prophecies, the word of the Lord. Make sense? Okay. Chapter 3, the day of the Lord is different in the sense that it is the judgment of all people in the valley of Jehoshaphat. Tyre, Sidon, and all the region of Philistia were judged for pillaging Judah, and they were accused of selling boys and girls as slaves to the Greeks in exchange for prostitutes and wine. And there again you're going to get a vision of vengeance, like found in some of the other prophets, minor prophets, and in Ezekiel. And so I would say that this Joel would be known for his liturgical references that we know in Ash Wednesday and Pentecost. And I did it with 4 minutes to go. So that was a huge tear through the Old Testament there, but we did it. And I hope that gives you a sense of what's going on there, some of the history, some of the words, some of the ways it connects to the New Testament. We're going to be doing something else different next month, and we'll be back on the same time, the second
Yep, the
Saturday.
second Saturday.
Okay, good. Good. And probably going to ask you to do another psalm. Pick out another psalm. but I'll have to look that up. I'll have to read my chapters first.
Cool.
So appreciate it. Appreciate your attention. Hope it helps in some way. Nothing else. We have a chance to dig into the Psalms a little bit, which is always fun. Just go running off somewhere.
To turn off the live stream.
Oh, okay. Well, now I've got to go and scurry off. My wife is playing in the Green Bay Symphony, and
Oh, fantastic.
maybe have a little bite to eat before